is with the authentic man, David Chambers, who is a dating, intimacy, and relationship coach for men. So tonight's Instagram live is with the authentic man, David Chambers, who is a dating, intimacy, and relationships coach for men. I'll be speaking to David about his career, how he helps men develop intimate relationships with their female partners, some of the challenges that he's faced as a dating and intimacy coach, as well as some common challenges. So, just for the benefit of those joining, I'll be speaking to David Chambers, the authentic man, who is a podcaster and a dating and intimacy coach and relationship coach. He empowers men and he's also got a podcast. I think David has joined. Let me see if I can add him. Where is he? So, again, just for benefit of those joining, I'll be joined by the authentic man, David Chambers. He helps men create deeper relationships with their female partners. I'll be speaking to David about his career today, as well as some comment. There we are. How are you, brother? How are you? You good?
Yeah, man, I'm good. How are you?
No, I'm good, bro. I'm really good. I'm good. Thank you for joining me. Long time. It's a long time coming.
Yeah, man, it's always a pleasure.
Yeah, the pleasure's mine. Before we start, I like to like what I usually like to do with guests is like ask them to do like a quick elevator pitch in terms of introducing yourself and the work that you do, and then we'll dive into the conversation. So, do you mind kicking off?
Yeah, man. I'm David Chambers. I'm a dating, relationship, and intimacy coach. Yeah, really committed to helping men create beautifully connected, passionate, and exciting relationships in all aspects. From getting into relationship, the dating world, staying in the love, and creating more of that love, and creating deeper and more powerful intimacy while they're in their relationships as well.
Cool. And you've been doing this work, is it for over 10 years now? Is that correct?
Yeah, for over like 10 years on and off, I've been like coaching men in dating, and then, more recently in the last 5 years, really been like completely committed to it over the last kind of 4 or 5 years.
And why did you embark in this career, if you don't mind me asking?
Mm. It started off because I had no troubles, man. It started off with dating troubles and struggling to meet the sort of women that I wanted to, um, and then learning and realizing that, it's not just say this, then do that, wear these clothes. Actually, especially in the dating stuff, it's like comes down to who you are, who you're being, like your values, your traits, the sort of man that you are, that you embody. And then in the last kind of 4 or 5 years, like more of the intimacy stuff's come just because I have a real passion for and love for sex and intimacy myself, and kind of seeing that it's a huge place where men really struggle actually in this kind of intimacy world. I think there's a kind of common misconception about men that like men are sexually empowered, for instance, and it's so far from the truth.
I'm just typing your details. I'm just in the pin. I'm listening. I know they do say that men can't multitask, but I mean I can't really multitask sometimes. But I'm trying anyway. But so whilst I'm trying to get you up here and pin your information so people can find out more. You mentioned that you started obviously in dating and then you moved into like sex and intimacy. What and then you spoke about very briefly about is it like some of the misconceptions that people have about men being sexually empowered. Can you elaborate on that a bit more, please? Whilst I
Yeah,
sort
man.
this out.
Yeah, I think there's this kind of idea, and I've seen this because I've spoken to quite a few women through some of the work I do with relationship coaching. I've spoken to a number of women, and they've been surprised when we talk about the fact that men are not like sexually empowered, or they're not really confident all the time. So what I see with a lot of men that I work with is, anything from like fear, like absolute fear and anxiety that comes up around sex, to people being scared of their partner. Things like premature ejaculation is rife. Stress is a massive one. I think it's one of those things that we don't realize how much stress affects libido and our sex drive and our ability to, maintain an erection in the way that we want to. But like, there's so many of these issues. I literally speak to every man I speak to across the board, all my coaching clients, whether they are in relationships or not, and there is some sort of sexual fear and issue that holds them back in more or lesser ways.
I agree with that. And when you spoke about like performance anxiety, because that's something that I often hear as well from men, and on the other side, it's like this perception or this misperception that all men, like you mentioned, are sexually empowered or they don't have any issues in the bedroom. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there is this perception that that men are sexually empowered? Or yeah, like what do you think? Is it culturally driven? Is it? I mean, why do we have that?
I think part of it is like the kind of misconception that men are always ready for sex. That's kind of contained inside that. There's this like societal conception we have that like, if a woman walked out on the street now in a crowded bar and said, "Hey, I'm ready right now," like every man would feel that he would have to pretty much be ready in seconds, or he's not a real man. Is that some of that men carry, but women carry that same idea. I've met a lot of women who have said, "Oh, I met a guy, and on the first night he couldn't get it up, so that means that he's not interested in me or he's not attracted to me." And you're like, wow, that's quite a leap. But I think it's because men are often portrayed in so many situations when it comes to sex as like knowing what they want, but the reality of it is a lot of men really don't know what they enjoy. They don't know about pleasure. They are just kind of following a script that they've learned through watching porn or reenacting out scenes they've experienced before, but they don't really have what I call kind of sexual empowerment, which is like, let's communicate, let's understand what you like and what I like, and try new things, and let go of judgment and shame. There's a lot of shame for men around sex, and they because of the shame and the perception of men knowing what they want and how they should want it, they don't ever talk to anyone about it. So the shame never goes anywhere. It just sits with them, and eventually they reach out to someone. Like I've had conversations with men, and they're like, they're telling me about, I don't know, they suffer from ED or they're having some issues with their partner. And upon speaking to me, they're like, I've had this issue for 10 years and I've never spoken these words out loud to another man before. And, I've had one instance where all he did was talk to me. He just talked about what was going wrong for him. I listened, and I obviously, said there's other men I've spoken to have had similar issues. I've had similar issues. And then he went and had sex with his partner that night. And he was like, I didn't have the anxiety. I didn't have the fear. I didn't have the worry. And all it was a conversation. I didn't really offer him any tips or anything. He was real self-generating, but the simply letting go of that through a conversation made a difference. So that shame has a very physical impact on us as well.
And why didn't that man and men similar to that man that you spoke about? Why is it that they wasn't comfortable to have that conversation with their female partner?
Judgment, a lot of judgment, like the fear that if I tell my woman that, I am having sexual difficulties, or I'm acknowledging the sexual difficulties, even if they've noticed it, because, if you're in a partnership, you're going to notice there's some difficulties sometimes. That will she judge me? Will she want to leave me? Some of the thoughts go that far, the fears and the worries. Will she think I'm less of a man if I tell her that there's this issue? And but what I see a lot is if there is a sexual issue in a relationship, a man often refuses to have a conversation about it. I'm not going to be stereotypical, but I see this so often where men have said, like, I just can't, they just avoid it, and they won't talk about it, they won't come forward. So it means that the conversation can't be had. And if the woman brings it up and says, hey, like, should we talk about the thing? He becomes very emotionally reactive and explodes sometimes, walks out, stonewalls, the usual ways that us men often deal with emotions that we feel uncomfortable with.
Mm. And just for the benefit of people who recently joined the last couple of minutes, I'm speaking to dating and intimacy coach David Chambers, who is also known as the Authentic Man. He's got over 10 years of experience teaching, empowering, and coaching men in all things around dating, intimacy, and relationships. And he's also the host of a podcast called The Authentic Man, which you can check out. And he's also got a website, theauthenticman.net, theauthenticman.net. Speaking of your website, I obviously had a quick look over it prior to, I've looked at it before and prior to obviously our IG Live. Why .net? Why not .com? You US based, or what did they do with that?
Man, the .com, I did try and get the .com, yeah. Tried to buy it. Man, some guy was trying to charge me like $5,000 for .com.
Okay. Okay, I wonder, because when I saw .net, I was like, this guy, I'm sure he's from the UK. I was like, what's .NET? Because usually I associate that with the US or like tech companies or something. I was like, is he doing AI or is he doing some? Okay, cool. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so again, if anyone wants to learn more about obviously David's work, check out obviously his website. He does. I think you've got some courses. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've
6 week
got
course. Can you
courses
talk
and
a little?
workshops.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about some of the service that you offers, like especially at the courses and programs? And I've got some other more questions. If you don't mind
Yeah,
talking a little bit about that.
yeah. So I've got at the moment, I've just got a program that's actually starting in a few days, end of the week, which is like really a men's program to take men through what I see as the fundamentals parts of being a modern, authentic man. You know, things like developing presence, developing more awareness of oneself and people around us, um, developing a deeper understanding of our emotions and our ability to express those in a way that is healthy and can be kind of held by other people, but also holding other people's emotions. I do some obviously a week about sexuality and our own sexual energy, as well as how we connect and communicate sexually with other people. Leadership as well, also leadership of your relationship, an important part. Goals and purpose, because those are a massive driver for a lot of men in their lives, as well as I've got a section there about feminine energy and being with our own feminine energy, but also the feminine energy that exists in the world and our female partners as well.
So, did you say our own feminine energy as men?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that entail?
Yeah, for me, so I often see that there's this kind of two-sided coin, you know. I see it as a map of the terrain, you know, like the map isn't the terrain, it's a map of the terrain to give us understanding. It's almost like we have two sides. We have this kind of masculine side, which is about structure and drive, forward movement, and um, awareness and consciousness, right? There's the stillness of consciousness. And then there's a kind of feminine side that we have, which is about like energy and flow and chaos and feelings and emotions. And a lot of the time in our society, what we've done with men is they only focus on those masculine side of things because they think, quote unquote, that's all we should do. And then it actually restricts our ability to kind of express ourselves. It restricts our range because we see anything that's feminine as like, oh, I shouldn't be going near that. Like a great example is nurturing, right? As a trait, like nurturing, often people say, oh, that's a feminine trait. So some men, you know, that stops them from looking after their children, nurturing their babies, nurturing their relationships, and all those things. So inside of that, I really help men expand their range and look at some of those traits and go, oh, you feel uncomfortable with that trait. Why is that? Is there a story there that you have in your mind, a narrative? Like, how would it benefit your life if you expanded into that part of your range? Like, what would it bring to you? Because I see that a lot of men almost are like trapped in little glass jars of how they think they should be as men. And it really restricts them in romantic relationships, but across the board.
And with your client base, just so people have a rough idea, what type of clients in terms of demographics, age, do you coach?
So most of my clients would probably be the age of like about 28, 29, up to about 45 in general. Most of them congregate in the 30s, which is, you know, kind of either side of my age. Um, and they're professional men of all races. It's one thing I feel really quite proud of. It's like, you know, my program, I think over 50% of the men in my program are black. Um, it's a few white guys in there and a few Asian guys, and I have a really nice spread of kind of people from all over the world. I've got clients in the States, I've got clients in Australia, quite a few in the UK, even had a couple in Europe. So it's like I kind of attract a really diverse type of man, which is really beautiful.
Mm. It's interesting what you said about the age range because that's kind of like the age range that I think most of people that I speak to or work with, sort of like the 30s, 40s. And someone was actually asking me how, because someone reached out and was asking how to attract like younger men, like in the sense of like, especially like late. I mean, I don't work with children, but she was saying like teenagers and like early 20s, especially with the whole, which we'll talk a little bit about later, about the whole like online manosphere and certain figures were really popular amongst young males, especially between the age of 16 and 24. And I want to hear your thoughts on that because for me, I was like, for me, it's very difficult to appeal to that demographic because a lot of it is about sensationalism. They want to find, like, they buy into this idea of like this so-called like alpha male and like these buzzwords, and they like to see like the performative aspect not only of sex but also of success kind of thing, and then they follow that kind of model, so to speak. Whereas a man that obviously by the time he's in his late 20s, 30s, you would expect him to have obviously been sexually active with at least a few sexual partners. So you're not teaching him sex, and it's not about teaching him sex. It's about, like you said, maybe empowering him or helping him eradicate some limiting beliefs or some insecurities that he may have, and realizing that although a number of your friends may be saying one thing, the reality is something totally different. And I think even as men, when we're in our friendship groups, there's a lot of bravado, there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of, excuse my language, bullshit when we speak about women and sex kind of thing. So that's why I find, because I was struggling because when she was asking like in terms of advice to attract a younger man like in his late teens, early 20s, I didn't know what to say, because even at that age, I don't think I wouldn't have appealed to myself in my late teens, early 20s, if I'm honest. If I'm honest, so how would you, like, if someone were to ask you, do you have any thoughts on how would you appeal to, yeah, like the younger demographic? Because that's something,
Yeah.
again, like, that's just not my that's not my remit.
Yeah, and it's the same with me. Kind of the way I've kind of positioned myself consciously and unconsciously is like I pay attention to the nuance of life. Life is incredibly nuanced, right? And I think when we're younger, we're, in our teens and our early 20s, we are looking for like strategies that are very clear, like step ABC, follow step to get what I want. And I think that's where, many of the figures of the online figures that we all know have given absolute clarity about how things are. Like, this is how it is. Anyone else telling you anything is lying to you. Don't believe them. I'm telling you how it is. That's how they start. Right? And I just think it's really disingenuous. I'm lying to you if I tell you this is how it is, because I've lived long enough to know that life is so incredibly nuanced that you need a level of maturity to pay attention and self-awareness as well. So it's funny you asked that. I'm actually going to be going into some schools in the next month or so. I'm going to be back in the
Really?
UK for that. Yeah, I'm going to go into schools and do some
Wow.
conversations around misogyny, about masculinity, and do some workshops with some of the kids around confidence and just like communication and the kind of boundaries, but also the impact, because I think that's something that we don't always think of as young people. Like, we might just say something and go, "Oh, we're just joking," but it's like, well, actually, like, what does that what have you just said, and how does it land for someone? How would it feel for you? Your bravado aside of like, "Oh, I don't care." Like, how would it actually feel for you? How could someone feel if you say that to them? Like, get them into empathy, because I think that's one of the things that often young people, in particular young men, let's be honest, struggle with, which is empathy. So I think if you want to appeal to younger people, you become very black and white. You be sensationalist, like you said. You create absolute clarity, which again, it doesn't sit well with me to do that, because can be convenient to believe when you're 16 years old that the world is like all black and white. Everything could be fit into an if or statement, and like everything could be fit into a graph that trees out perfectly and very simply. Um, but that will just set you up for pain in life generally, right? Because I guess schooling would be painful. Relationships are going to be painful, because you're going to be like, well, if this person isn't doing this, then that means that. And we know that life is just not that simple.
Yeah. No, I agree. Life is not a math equation. Definitely, I agree with that. So do you? So then, if that's the case, then well, it's good actually you are going to schools. Um, but would you have to change your maybe style or approach to appeal to like younger men? I'm just wondering compared to like what you do. Okay, right.
Yeah, so I've spoken to the couple of schools I'm going to be going into, and like, they've seen my content and what I do. So it's really just coming from maybe picking simple topics and I don't need to go as deep into, something like, if we're talking about misogyny, it's like simply being like, okay, it doesn't work for us, right? If your aim is as a young man to be liked by women and, maybe attract women or be liked by your friends, like, is this behavior actually doing that? Like, yeah, you might make people laugh, but how much pain are you causing? Like, are you actually creating connection? Because that's the thing you want. There's part of you that wants this girl, to like you, but by being mean to her and hurting her feelings and treating her as lesser than, like, that's not going to actually lead you there, is it? But also, I'm going to definitely tie this in stuff like, especially with misogyny as young men, it's like, them saying that women have a certain place in the world. It's like, well, how would you feel if that was your mother or your sister? That someone said, no, she can't come in this shop or she can't do this job. Like, how would you feel about that? Like, if someone did that to your cousin or someone in your family, like, stop for a moment, that they were limited from doing what they truly wanted to do that was like meaningful to them, that would make them happy just because of someone else's opinion of how the world should be.
I hear that. I hear that. And with you also mentioned that, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said 50% or roughly half of your clients are black, which is
Mhm.
refreshing to hear. Especially, and that's why I know we've had this conversation offline when actually I was on your podcast. I can't believe was it 2021, end of
I
2021?
think it was
I think it
2021,
was,
wasn't
yeah.
it?
So, and I was meaning to obviously have this conversation because one of the frustrating things that it's been for me, and I think we did speak about this on your podcast, was that the lack of black male figures in the space.
Mhm.
Well, let me qualify. Black straight male figures, especially in the space, if I'm quite honest with you, and that's why coming across obviously your work is refreshing, and that's obviously I do try and support it as and when I can because I don't like this idea that or this perception that oh you're one or one of very few.
Mm.
So it's good that like I said, the work that you're doing, and I'll try and obviously amplify not only your work but obviously your services. 'Cause I think it should be the norm kind of thing, and I think we've got different things that we can kind of offer, and not only to other black people, but that they don't just see us as performers in the bedroom as
Humans.
well. Yeah, that's something that's why I'm really glad that we're having this conversation and hearing that a number of black men are reaching out and obviously you're coaching and empowering. What are, if any, um, challenges that you think that black men, and I'm speaking in a Western context, so UK and America, do you think common challenges that black men face in particular compared to other races and ethnicities? And the reason why I asked that question is because I really had a good conversation with Cam Fraser, and he was talking about his work being. I don't know if he coined it, but I like the term he said. His work is intentionally exclusive,
Yeah.
and he works with white heterosexual Australian males. Not to say that no other demographic,
Mm.
he can't work with, but he knows his target audience. He speaks and delivers his work in a way that appeals to that demographic, and that way is kind of more focused and it's quite clear cut because the use of languages and maybe some issues that he knows that they will relate to, he can appeal to them. So speaking, I know you have clients across the board, not only black people, you've got Asians and whites and what have you, but if my question in particular in regards to black men, what are some of maybe the unique challenges that you think that black men in particular in the West face in relation to intimacy and dating? So it's a
Okay.
two-pronged question.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things I think inside of the intimacy, or start with the intimacy for black men, is a weight of expectation, right? The weight of expectation of performance, right? Of like they're gonna bring the throwdown, you know,
Yeah.
like because there is this media perception about black men being hyper masculine, right? It's been there for years, and the 90s, and we hear now, and really we still in many cultures, especially music, it's played on, right? And then if you look at say sport, which I think there's a study I looked at a while ago, and it was basically saying that commentators, like on average, are like 20 or 30% more likely to talk about black players' physical attributes over their on-ball skill, right? So there's still this kind of idea of black men being physically superior and having physical prowess, and part of that physical prowess is penis size, right? Ultimately, that's one of the kind of common myths and so forth. So that's a big pressure for a lot of guys, that they're like, oh, I need to be this like hyper masculine, big dick, throw down black man. And then maybe they're a bit more sensitive, and they're a bit more like gentle, and they're a bit more what's the word I'm looking for? Like they're a bit more like studious, and they love reading books, and they love the English language, and they're maybe a bit more flamboyant, and it doesn't tally with that, and that way of expectation can often be a thing for them. Um, and then I think a lot of black guys is sometimes feeling that that black women don't find them attractive. There's something that I've worked with a few guys, and they're like, black women don't want to talk to me. But then when they do talk to me, they're saying stuff about me the fact that I date white women, and they're left in this really weird quandary of like, okay, I'm happy to date whoever because I'm brought up in the UK or whatever, but I feel like the black women who I might be open to won't go near me, and then they judge me for not dating them, and they feel almost a level of resentment and annoyance and anger towards that. So a lot of that is kind of helping them dissolve that and see that there's probably some narrative and some story they have around black women, around their openness and the sort of women that they are. So that's some common dating ones, as well as, some of the standard things that, men have, fears and anxieties about um, just meeting women in general. I think something I'd say within black men is really common, and it sounds quite stereotypical, but it is this like commitment. Commitment being this fear and worry about commitment. I see that quite commonly around black men, and communication. Like commitment and communication, those two things, like not being able to like fully communicate the depths of their feelings and emotions, but on the other side also having fears and worries about commitment and what that means, and like what a relationship means and the pressures that kind of come with that. That's the dating piece. And then I guess with intimacy again, it's that kind of, the physical prowess and expectation. Did I answer this one? No, I think I went both of them.
Yeah, a very comprehensive answer. Yeah, you came to 5. So with the there's so much to unpack with that. With the I'll start with the where you ended on with the physical prowess. The perception that black men are hypersexual, mandingo, warrior, big dick, all the rest of it, right?
Mm.
Is there any? Do you think there's any or advantage to that in for some men? And the
Oh,
reason why I say that is because when I was young, that is something that you play up to. But then obviously, then you get to a period where actually you can build in some insecurities because you've got this you've got this high expectation that people, or obviously the woman that you're with, expects you to kind of perform,
mm,
and then even you yourself, if you don't give that great performance, you're kind of less than, and that performance. So, and I'm using performance in inverted commas, maybe average or okay, but you're supposed to be this hyper male in the bedroom kind of thing. So it's got like its pros and cons, and because it's interesting because I had a conversation with someone and she was talking about like black men being fetishized and things like that, and I said that for some men, especially when they're relatively young, like teenagers, early 20s, they buy into being fetishized. They don't mind it because
mm,
they just want a casual encounter. They just want, excuse my language, to bust a nut, and with the more women they can, and if women are buying into that stereotype and it helps them,
mm,
then they will play into that. Obviously, she probably will be, let down after, but he's got what he's wanted, and then he can move on. But that's just reality. It's obviously maybe when they get older and they realize actually they don't want to just be viewed as this hypersexual beast, so to speak, kind of thing. But it is something that because when I was trying to explain to this lady that there are a number of men that, especially from not only of relatively young age, but relatively, you could say, quite immature, don't mind that and play into that. And she couldn't get wrap her head around it. But then she was thinking about as a black woman being hypersexualized. But then I was saying that there's probably not as many benefits, so to speak, as there is maybe for compared to a black man. So that's why
mm,
if you want to deconstruct and get rid of it, it's like the men need to feel that I don't want to be viewed that way when a number of them don't mind. It's like if a man was called a porn star, he
mm.
probably would think that's a good thing. But obviously, when it gets to a certain age and level of maturity, it's like, no, I'm not just a porn star. So that probably is something that I imagine in your work with the schools that probably you're gonna need to kind of help address because that's where it starts, isn't it? And then you have to wait until like their 30s, and then they need to meet someone like yourself to kind of help unravel all of these issues that have been playing up in their lives. So um, before I go, because I want there was a couple of other things that you really mentioned that I wanted to kind of talk about was the commitment issue that and communication. Why do you think that commitment and communication is something that a number of black men that you've worked with struggle with?
mm. It's quite a few of the men that I've worked with that struggle with this have been Caribbean men. And then when I start talking to them about the way their fathers are and the family set up, there's common patterns. And they're common patterns that resonate with my own experience. Like my dad's a very like unemotional person. I saw lots of relationships break down around me. And it's the same thing I see with some of my clients. It's like, they grew up in single parent households. They had no example of what a healthy relationship would look like. When I say healthy relationship, I think one of the most important things for us to see is that if conflict happens and conflict can be resolved, such an important thing, I think, for young people to see that, like, oh, two people can have a disagreement and then maybe disagree about it and then find a way to kind of come together and repair and not just sweep under the carpet, because that also creates other issues as well. So I see with my clients where they saw their parents like repairing issues, they're less likely to kind of be avoidant, and they're used to seeing people communicate. So when I see quite a few of my kind of Caribbean heritage clients, is like they never knew their dad wasn't around, or if he was around, like, he barely spoke, he barely said anything, he didn't communicate. They didn't have this experience of people being like, how are you feeling today, son? Like, do you want to this, oh, you like going on your bike? How about this? I'll grab my bike, you get yours, and we'll go and do something together that feels like it's fun and emotional. It's like the dad didn't give them that. So often that affects their whole concept of masculinity as well. So the commitment one is like, if you've seen all these relationships break down, then it really, I've seen that really hurt people. And like the fear around commitment can be massive. And the pressure of like, if I do find a relationship, it has to be perfect. This idea of like, especially if we haven't seen relationships that kind of work around us, we can get into this idea, either consciously or unconsciously, that if I meet the right person, then the right relationship will just unfold. And we don't have the kind of concept and thinking about that.
Yeah, you're back. Yes, well, yeah.
Yeah, we don't have the kind of concept and idea that a relationship is built. You have to build a relationship with communication, with openness and honesty and all these sorts of things. So we don't have that concept. So we kind of chasing around for the perfect woman, believing that if you meet the right woman, you meet the perfect woman, then everything will unfold perfectly. And if we're in a relationship and things are not good, then it means there's something wrong with the woman and I need to find a new one. That's something that I've seen a lot as well.
Yeah, that's powerful. That is very true. And it does bring home, and even I was thinking of a couple of podcasts I even recently listened to, black men podcasts, or like podcasts of black guys, I think ranging, in their like 30s, and like when they were talking about like one particular instance, they were talking about oh, what would you, and I don't really like these type of like scenarios, like these hypothetical, what would you do if such and such, and they were talking about like they said, oh, what would you do if you tried to initiate intimacy with your missus and she refused? And then they went around of like 4 or 5 people, and it was like, oh, if she refuses, she's not interested after 2 times, I'll get rid of her. Just like, really? But then I was thinking, okay, and then there was other like similar scenarios that if this happened, like when there's a conflict, just kind of like replace. And whilst these conversations sounded quite immature, these men are not immature in terms of age, like in their 30s. But then I think, like what you said, is about this perception that people have is like, when I find a so-called perfect woman, then I have the perfect relationship. There will be no conflicts, or there'll be no issues. When in reality, every relationship will have issues, but it's about, like you spoke about, the importance of conflict resolution and like communication. But if you haven't seen that, and your idea of a relationship is just two like perfect or ideal people coming together, then you won't need to learn conflict resolution, because there will be no conflicts, and that's not true. And I just think if you haven't seen, like you said, healthy relationships where there's going to be issues in every relationship, but it's how you resolve them and if you're able to communicate. And I just find it's really interesting that a number of men have like this, I would say, warped, even some women, understanding of relationships, that has to be perfect kind of thing, but then they don't have that with their friends. Like the same way with your friends, you have issues. Like you always agree with one another. You have to learn to compromise. That's just the way it is in life. And you understand with all types of relationships, whether it's relationship with your parent, with a child, but when it comes to between like the opposite sex, obviously I'm speaking within the context of a heterosexual relationship, it's like it has to be ideal. Otherwise, it's easily disposable.
Yeah.
And that's something which it's crazy. Yeah, but I'm wondering, unless you've seen that, like you said, in the home, how would someone learn how to develop healthy relationships? I laid this up for you to plug in. You have to come and see me. That was a nice layup.
Plug it in. It's really multi-layered actually, because it really is. you know, if you're in a relationship, right, and you've allowed the relationship to fester and get toxic, and you want to you're not solve the relationship, you want to kind of bring that relationship to something healthy. Like you got to do a lot of work to remove resentment because there's going to be a ton of resentment around, right? That's the first thing that's going to be. You got to remove, and then some of resentment, you just got to let it go. You just got to say, you know what, it's happened. I take responsibility for it, and I'm going to strive to be better in the future. Um, and allow that to be put behind them. That thing for a lot of people is hard. They don't want to let go of the resentment. In fact, they want to grip onto it and be like, I was right or you're bad and that can be a really terrible thing. Learning to create a space where you can communicate, like people can communicate how they feel, what they want, what they need, where people can speak without being interrupted or being attacked or being shouted at. That's a really, really important thing. And I say all this because I work with couples. So me and my partner have walked couples through this. It's like creating a space where they can share and go, this thing happened, it really upset me. The reason why it upset me is because of this. And the other person listen and truly listen, and put aside their kind of mental story that they have. So creating a space for communication, which is vital. Like that bit is like a non-negotiable, like a safe space for communication. There's an acceptance of imperfection as well. Must accept the imperfection of ourselves. Because I think that's what I see quite commonly in men who are looking for this perfect partner, the perfect relationship, is they're often quite harsh on themselves. Their inner critic is very critical of themselves, right? So it's accepting that there's imperfection in the world and that it's okay to be imperfect. Actually, it has its benefits to be imperfect as well. So that's a couple of things. So that's the acceptance of perfection, the communication, conflict resolution. A big part of this is accepting that we have different perceptions of the same situation. Because a lot of the time people get into this like, I'm right, you're right. No, I'm right, you're wrong. Get rid of that in your relationship. Right and wrong in a relationship is the most useless thing. It has no benefit to your relationship being right or being wrong. It doesn't help you move forward. All it does is make one person feel like they're lesser than or they're stupid, and the other person feels like they're righteous and they know everything and they're superior. That doesn't help with connection. Like you can lovingly just say, hey, yeah, okay, I get you see it that way and I can understand how you see it that way. You don't even need to say that last bit of, but I don't agree with you. You can just accept that they see the world in one way and I see it another way. So that's a couple of steps there. Intimacy as well is like making space. Again, it's a communication piece, but also making time and energy for it, you know, because we're busy people, you know, when we get into a certain age, we've got work, we might have children, all those things. And it's like prioritizing these things, prioritizing intimacy is something that we're going to put energy to. And there might be discussions, there might be trying new things, whatever it is, but it's like putting energy to the things that matter most. And I think another thing is fun. Of all this relationships, you've got to have fun. And it's something that's often negated is like, actually just try and spend time together to have fun, not just veg out and watch TV and do nothing, but actually to get together and go, okay, what do we enjoy? Like, okay, let's go for a walk in a park or the forest or the beach or whatever, you know, tickles your fancy. But it's to cultivate all of those things: safety, fun, enjoyment, passion.
Yeah, well said. I like what you mentioned about fun. Now, I often hear when people are talking about like long-term relationships or like marriages, I always hear people saying, "Oh, it's hard work." That doesn't sound appealing to me. I'm wondering why is it? No, I'm being honest. I'm just wondering why is it fun and like excitement? That's kind of not. And I'm wondering, do you think that's also part of the reason why a number of men may have commitment issues? Because if I'm hearing something is hard work, something is difficult, it's challenging, it's not gonna. It's just naturally not appealing to want someone to gravitate towards it, you know. Whereas again, like you mentioned about speaking about the importance of fun, and obviously, but finding ways to create fun and excitement, I think definitely more people would appeal to that or aspire to have that. And again, if that's kind of seen as like you can still be a man and respected and still have like this relationship, I think a lot of men will kind of more buy into that. So yeah, when you said fun, my ears kind of lit up because always hearing about it's hard work. Well, anyway, before I get to my ask my next question, just for the benefit of those who have joined the last couple of minutes. I'm speaking to David Chambers, also known as the Authentic Man. He is a dating, relationships, and intimacy coach for men. He's also the host of the Authentic Man podcast, which you can find on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you listen to podcasts. Over is it 130 episodes? Was it?
I think it's about
So
150 now. There's a lot of
150.
episodes.
Wow. Yeah, it's been going on for a few years. So he speaks to a number of people on various topics surrounding dating, intimacy, and relationships. Definitely go and check that out, as well as his website, theauthenticman.net. Yes, you heard that correctly. .net. He's a special person in this regard. So theauthenticman.net, where he again, you can find out more about the work that he does, and some of the courses that he delivers, and he does give one-to-one coaching online, I'm assuming, as well. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, he gives one-to-one online coaching, and we've just been speaking about his career to date, some common challenges that he's faced, and intimacy issues as well. And one of the things I noticed, I think, was on your website or your bio, you spoke about the importance of building, is it intimate relationships?
Mm.
Why did you? I'm sure you was consciously use the word intimate relationship. What's an intimate relationship?
I see intimacy as closeness, as a
Right.
form of closeness. So, often we think of intimacy, we just think of sex, right?
Yeah,
And it's why I don't say I'm a dating relationship and sex coach, because I think intimacy is this
that's my next
deeper.
question. Okay, you took that out. I didn't go on the gun. Sorry, can't jump the gun. I know, go on. Sorry, bro.
Um, because intimacy is deeper, it's like it's the emotional intimacy, which is again is like one of the really, really important things to cultivate in a relationship. So I spend a lot of time actually with my clients is like, okay, how's the emotional intimacy? How emotionally close are you and your partner? How do you express love to each other? Like how do you do that? How do you do that? Is it received as love as well? But there's also other types of intimacy. I was reading an article not long ago, and it said there was like up to 8 types of intimacy, which I can't reel off, right? But there's like experiential intimacy. Like how close are you with your experiences? Do you go and do things together like that, that could be fun and interesting? Um, there was one around conflict, like conflictual intimacy. It's like how close are you when you have conflict? Do you become completely distant? Because some couples they have a conflict and they don't talk to each other for 2 weeks, you know. But if there's a closeness, you can have conflict, then you can talk about it, resolve it, and move on back into the kind of space of love moving forward. So there's just so many different types of intimacy, as well as obviously physical, touch, physical intimacy. And again, this is another area that a number of men that I have spoken to over the years that I feel very like avoidant of, just like holding hands, kissing, like those sorts of little ways of having physical intimacy, which are really important. And all of these feed into the sexual intimacy. All of these really feed into the sexual intimacy when it comes to relationships. So it's so important to nurture all of those types of intimacies. So I spend a lot of focus on those because I've seen so often if you're watering all those, then the sexual intimacy that you don't even have to actually have to be all wild and stuff. You can just like there's a loving connection between two people, and it can flow in a way that feels safe and open.
You mentioned like a number of men you've worked with have issues or avoid like kissing and holding hands. So with kissing, is that in public or also behind closed doors? It also so okay. What type of guys? I mean, okay, sorry. Can you expand on that? Because those men who are uncomfortable with kissing, is it because yeah? I'm just wondering why that is. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, yeah. So it's this kind of notion of like I'm not affectionate. I'm not an affectionate man. That comes up, right? I'm not an affectionate man. I don't do this like hugging and kissing. And then, sometimes I've got into it with them, and it's like, sometimes they comes from like schoolyard stuff, like someone made fun of them when they were at school because they were holding hands with a girl, or someone saw them kissing someone, and even down to one man I remember, it's like he got when he was in his teens, like an auntie saw him with a girl holding hands, and then he got beats from his dad, and like, ever since that he's like partly afraid of being outside with a woman holding hands, even though it's his wife, you know? So it's these kind of old things that are running. Or if we grew up in homes where there wasn't much kind of touchy-feely, you know, hugging and stuff like that, then we're just not kind of used to it. We're not trained in that way of being. So they often find it kind of uncomfortable or weird. These are the words that they use. Um, but it's just practice. It just takes, like so many things, you need to practice at it, you know? Like I compare things a lot to football these days with people because I just think there's so many analogies. It's like, you know, Saka doesn't just walk on the pitch every week and just smash the thing in the bottom corner. He practicing all week long. All week long he's doing that. Practicing. And it's something that I think as men we have to realize that you can't just like be the finished article. Everything takes practice and work. And it doesn't have to be hard work. It can be hard work, but the work can be fun work. It can be fun work, you know? As I say to my clients when I talk about sexual intimacy, I'm like, this is fun work. I'm giving you homework. This is the best homework you're ever going to get.
I'll be honest with you, bro. I loved everything you were saying. I was riding with, I was agreeing with you. When you dropped the Saka, the Arsenal reference, you just lost me. I was like, oh God, I forgot you was an Arsenal fan. And if you said like Son, I'd have been, yeah, okay. Kane, you said Saka, I was like, oh, God. Even though he's my Nigerian brother, but come on, I mean, you let me down. That's why I'm thinking I'm going to edit this live, so drop that part out, or maybe just bleep over it. Why did you have to mention Saka?
Might
He
give a
lost me
little,
totally. I was just fuming. I was like, when he said Saka, I was like, nah, the
might
football
do a
reference,
little
yeah, I
voice.
get it. I
You
get it.
might
I
do
like
a
the
little
analogy.
voiceover.
I might have to, honestly. Oh, God. Can't have no Arsenal on my IG live. Um, but yeah, what you said about the playground and like I like the schoolyard and how kind of like people's view or perception of masculinity and how that shapes, especially their interaction with women. That is definitely true. I definitely agree with that. And it's quite interesting because it's like amongst a lot of men, and this only young one, it's even older men. This idea that if you show some forms of affection to your other half, you're unmanly.
Mm.
You know, and it's such a weird. And then obviously there's certain words that men will insult other men, describing like the female anatomy to kind of belittle a man.
Mm.
And it's like this idea that you need to become a man, you need to gain acceptance and approval from other men, even in relation to a woman that you're with. I'm never really I've no I understand it somewhat, but I just think after a while it's like these are like grown men who still kind of think like this. Like there's certain acts and things that they wouldn't do because it's not respected amongst by other men, or they might do it, but it couldn't be known, you know. And this idea, you know, like a lot of men are very performative, and because they're thinking about what their boys or what other men will say, um, yeah, it's just it's. Do you think men grow out of that, or how can they grow out of that? Those people that have those kind of views.
I think that if there's no one to kind of keep the man,
So I lost you there, bro. I don't know if hello, can you, still
yeah.
mute. I can't hear you. Yeah, sorry, God.
So if there's no one to help the man grow, because I think that's also like an important part. It's like as men, if we don't have people around us that will help us grow, we're going to be stuck in, you know, the maturity of a 25-year-old if we're not careful, you know. And for a lot of men, sometimes the person that helps them grow into maturity is the woman they meet. You know, for a lot of men, that is their gateway to personal development work. You know, a lot of guys I meet. So to grow out of it, he needs to start to see like that these rules that he's taken on are not his. You know, this comes at a point where it's like, oh, they're not mine. And like, are they true? Do they work? You know, do they work for me? Do they work for my wife? And it's to having the awareness of saying, because there's so many of these little rules that we get, right, as we grow up. And it's a point where we start to question those rules as like what being a man is. And for different men, it comes in different times. Like for quite a few guys, it comes when they have mental health issues. They have some mental health issues, and they, you know, they grew up, you know, you don't tell no one, you just keep it to yourself, you just grim and bear it, you keep your head down, like you suck it up, you know, all those things, and then they have a mental health issue, and they realize that, oh wow, actually talking about it helps. So they go and talk to someone, a therapist or a Samaritan, whoever, and then they realize, oh, that helps. Then they can start to see like, oh, I didn't get help because I didn't think that I could do that as a man. And then if they start to then question some of these other man ideals, then they start to break out of it. But there's some men who don't, they're like, oh, this is how it is. This is how it is, this is how the world is. And then they find all this evidence of that's how it is, they'll be telling their partners like, okay, a lot of men are like, oh, I don't go down on my partner. I won't go down on my partner, don't do that. And then they'll find all this evidence of why men shouldn't do it. They'll find you internet, they'll find you books, they'll give you the Bible, they'll give you everything about why a man shouldn't do it, because that's his reality. That's what he wants to believe. He's not going to search out evidence of why it's amazing for the partner, why women are happier because of this, why the men get more sex if they're willing to do this, and yada, yada, yada. So it's like it takes someone who's willing to kind of question those rules, those ideas that he has, and maybe even break out from the friendships he has. Like, I think a common thing, there's so much talk about men and loneliness. And like I see a lot of men who get into their kind of mid to late 30s, and I call it a midlife awakening. We have this idea about midlife crisis, but for a lot of men, it's a midlife awakening. They look at their life and they're like, my life isn't what I wanted. I don't want my life to be like this. Like maybe they're happy in their marriage, but they look at their job, they look at their friends, they look at their drinking or their drug taking, and they're like, wow, this isn't what I want. And they start to make these changes, and it allows them to shift and change, and they have to leave all their friends behind. Some of them, I've worked with a number of men who were like, I've had to leave all my friends because that's all they do, and they don't want to come on any journey with me. So sometimes for some men, that's also part of the journey of growing. It's like you have to leave, you have to be like a bit like a snake, you have to leave that skin behind and move on to something new.
Yeah, I like that. Again, that was another one you threw me off. When you said snake, I was like, but leave the skin behind. You got me. I like that. Not gonna lie, I was like, snake? Where's he go with this one? But I like, new skin. I like that. No, that's definitely true. That's definitely true. You also, in your work, I've read again in your article, you speak about embodying healthy masculinity. There's a lot of talk online about toxic masculinity. Can you first define what toxic masculinity is and how? Because I think you mentioned, I think I saw one of your, it wasn't your podcast, but a podcast that you did, you spoke about like dealing with toxic masculinity. How can that be eradicated after you kind of first define what that is?
Yeah, I think the first toxic masculinity I see as a set of traits, behaviors, and actions which are harmful to people, both themselves, but also society as a whole. And they're particularly associated with men. There are things like, dominance, culture, bullying, homophobia, transophobia, anything that's like really puts themselves into dominating others, dominating women in particular as well. Sexism and misogyny is a part of that. So I say it's anything of those kind of behaviors that kind of sit under that umbrella for me. And then in terms of embodying healthy masculinity is to start to question those rules. There's a really good study. I haven't read the whole study, but I've read kind of some of the output of it around man box culture, which is saying that like there's these rules as men that we live by. It was done in Oakland, the project in the 80s. I can't remember what the guy was, but there's all these rules that we have to live by as men. Like, don't show our emotions, don't ever be seen as a girl. Don't be heterosexual, not homosexual. Don't talk about anything too deep. And the list goes on, and we see how we unconsciously as men we live inside these rules like a kind of box/cage, and it's starting to question those, like questions, even conversations like this, like, how often do men sit around and talk about sex and intimacy and relationships as something that's important, especially relationships. Men don't often talk about relationships as a thing that is important and valuable to their life. It's like, as you were saying before, it's a bit throwaway, like, okay, she's not doing what I want, I need to get rid of her. So relationships are a part of what
just for anyone listening, I didn't say that's what I do. I'm just saying that's what some men say. Because that sounded wild when you said it. That's so clip that. I was saying that's kind of like what guys say.
That's what guys
maybe
say.
A long time ago, but not anymore. I'm a changed man. I'm changed. I'm not like that anymore. So yeah, that sounded wild. Sorry. That sounded wild. Sorry, bro. Go on.
He said it. It wasn't him who was doing it. He commented on the podcast with some people that were doing it. But it's like valuing those things, right? Connection, like valuing connection between people, whether that's friendship and family connections, but we kind of socialized out of this. Anything that involves emotions is like, that's girly. We shouldn't do that. That's the kind of message we get from a young age. And we, a big part of it is dominating women. That's a big part of the man box culture, is like men should dominate women. And then we get all the things that we see in society. It's not all of society, but we see little pickings of it. So we have to question those rules and start to choose to act differently and experience how our lives change when we do that. So I guess, to say again, like embodying healthy masculinity is also to see that there's a range. There's so much more of a range as being a man that you can be. You don't have to be financially successful. That it doesn't make you a real man. You don't have to be hench, and you don't have to go to the gym, and you don't have to sleep with loads of women. Like all those things, they're not hallmarks of being a real man. That's just something someone said. Like a real man can wear pink, and a real man can wear a hat, and a real man can wear sandals, because like, there was a point in my life where I wouldn't wear sandals because I was like, nah, man don't wear sandals. Nah, nah, nah. Man can't wear sandals. And that was literally what I used to tell myself and say to my friends, and we would laugh and joke about it. But it's like those tiny things that we won't do that like hold us back from a level of self-expression and just being.
Mm, mm. No, that's very true. Um, I know you did, and I kind of asked on this, but I kind of want you to expand, if you don't mind, a bit more. 'Cause I'm interested in why is it you specifically. I know you did mention that you and your partner does work with couples, but obviously you branded yourself as a dating intimacy coach specifically for men.
Mm.
Did you ever, or have you considered offering your services specifically for women? And if not, why? Like, I'm just wondering, why is it that you've, consciously put, dating intimacy coach for men as
I,
opposed to like offering it for women?
I think personally, and it's something I'm open to. I'm actually open to working with women, but I think men need the most help. I think men need the most help because, and I think there's a lot of people who are coaching women, offering services to women. Like that's boomed in terms of like dating, relationship, and intimacy. That's an industry that's massively boomed in the last, say, kind of 8 to 10 years. Especially the dating world. I think I see the catalyst of that, and that's maybe my skewed lenses. Matt Hussey, he wrote a book called Get the Guy, and I think that kind of exploded the idea for women that they could do something to get a man. It wasn't just they had to just see what came along their way. And I
Yeah.
think men are behind. They're often resistant to stepping into growing and letting go of their rigid ideals. So, and I had that experience of being a man. I had the experience of like embodying this man suit all of my life and walking around the world in it and knowing what it feels like. So I have a lot of resonance with them. Um, I really enjoy working with women though, because like I said, with the couples work, I've, the last year definitely worked with like 7 or 8 women, right? And what I'll say is what I'm seeing working with women is there's like a profound healing for a woman when she sits opposite a man who is open, is kind, is present, and is listening deeply to her, right? And what's going on with her, and trying to understand her situation. Like a number of women that I've coached through the couples work I've done have just started to cry after a few minutes. Not because I've said anything or they shared anything, but they're just like, no, I don't think they said that no man's ever sat with them with the level of presence I've offered them. And it's like dawned on them, like in a moment, like I've never felt this way in which I feel safe to share and be open and not to be kind of attacked in any way and just given some space. And upon realizing that, then it's almost upsetting to them because they realize like, oh, this is the thing I've been missing. So I definitely see that there's some benefit for it. And again, I'm not against it. I'm definitely open to if women want to come and work with me. But I just see that like men need so much. Like women have got, how do I put this? I was talking to my friend about this today. There's been a female empowerment movement, sorry, that's been going for like 40, 50, 60 years, right? And it kind of circles back to something I said really earlier. Is like men are not empowered. Like men are not empowered, even if there are men who have power, whether that's like job and title and stuff like that. If you look at how those men act as men, they're not empowered men. they have power, but they're not empowered. They're acting like big children in the world. They haven't moved through some of those dysfunctions and traumas that they have, because no one's saying to men, hey, you can rise up a bit more, because there's the assumption that because they're men, they have everything. You know, the world is built for men, but there's a lot of men who are massively disempowered, and we're seeing it more and more now with the rise of, you know, the manosphere, as you mentioned before, that there's huge swaths of men who are feeling definitely disillusioned with society. And I think that, and I think it's going to happen in the coming years, that there needs to be a lot more attention on those men, because we're seeing in the United States, like the statistics around like the men shooting up schools and all other places. There's a particular demographic of man, and they fit exactly into a particular type of way. They're usually white, they're usually loners. They don't have many friends. They spend a lot of time on the internet getting angrier and angrier, right? They have some fascination with guns as well, often, right? And very interestingly, some of those things are also the hallmarks of someone who's going to be a serial killer as well. I read a book years ago called The Cases That Haunt Us. It's by, I think, Jonathan Douglas. If anyone's seen the series Mindhunter on Netflix, that's the kind of dramatization of the book. But in a couple of his books, he really talks about all the signals of what creates like a serial killer, particularly like a shooting serial killer. And what we're seeing with a lot of those traits is those are the people that are going into schools and so forth and killing people. But because they don't see any opportunity for themselves, they're struggling in dating because they don't have the social skills to connect with women. They don't get the education for whatever reason. And what they see is that women are taking everything from them, when they're not taking anything. Women are just like upping their game. You know, they've been allowed to up their game because it's less oppression. So I think that we're going to see now we need to put some attention on boys. And, you know, it's going to be a bit of a seesaw, isn't it? It's like women are rising up. Oh, the boys are low. Now we need to give them attention. Oh, the girls can be below. It's going to be like that. And maybe it'll be like that for the rest of eternity. But I think we need to put some attention on young boys and young men to empower them and give them some of the skills that they need to thrive in the world as it changes.
Very well said. Very well answered. Now, more power to you, bro. I mean, I didn't answer the question as in that you should be working with women, but I wanted to hear which you kind of did, you know, explain like the importance of your work, because I do feel like you did mention there does seem to be somewhat of an imbalance, like where in this space of like dating and intimacy, that you are finding not only female coaches but also a lot of male coaches going into that field for women. And oftentimes I think some of the men are selling dreams, if I'm completely honest with you. And I was and again I'm speaking obviously within the context of a heterosexual relationship, that if there are women who are seeking whether seeking to attract a guy for commitment or to try and have a fulfilling relationship, and then the guy who's talking is just presenting himself as this ideal man, and then just saying all this, but he's not empowering on it or helping the guys on the other side. You're gonna have, yes, a lot of empowered women, but then where are the guys?
Yeah.
So there is a disconnect. So that's why, and as much as people may have an issue with, you know, some of these online personalities, there's a reason why a number of men, not only young men, but even old men, gravitate to them. And a number of men, whether you agree or disagree with a lot of like their rhetoric or their approach, most men can understand the appeal. But when I speak to a number of men, they can't even understand why is it that, you know, grown men are listening to certain people's content, and they can understand it. And that's that disconnect. That's why you do need like more men like yourself doing what you're doing to work with men, because, you know, if no one's going to be, like you mentioned, empowering these men, there are men that maybe do have power but not empowered. And then you have obviously a lot of women that are looking for partners, or they're in like loveless and sexless marriages, but they don't know how to communicate. There's still going to have that issue kind of thing. So that's why it's definitely important that, you know, like I said, like the work that you're doing. Unfortunately, it's not as lucrative, to be honest, and that's the reality. That's what people don't realize, is that to just target women and just tell them not what they want to hear, but, you know, you will be, you know, people will prop you, you probably make more money, and then because it's a business, then you might just keep doing it, but you're not actually helping those women get what they want, especially again if they're looking for, if they just want like empowerment for themselves, that's different.
Mm.
But if it's okay, how can I have a meaningful relationship with my other half? You need to, there needs to be someone or some people to offer those similar services for the men,
Mm.
you know, and that's one of the biggest challenges that I've noticed like in the space is that, you know, it's just a very, it's the imbalance is like, it's just wild kind of thing. So
Yeah.
again, yeah, just more power to the work that you're doing.
The one thing I will say as well is I think what's really important for women is, and you touched on it there, it's like women cannot understand the appeal of some of these online figures. And that's part of the problem, right? Men know all, not, okay, let me roll that back. Many men know many of women's problems and the historical nature of those problems, right? Women are not educated in men's problems and the problems that men face, which mean they struggle to understand men. Like, you know, in the same way I said earlier that most women think men are confident, so they don't see that the men have pain and struggle and trauma they've had to deal with. So I think I always implore the women I work with is like, okay, do you understand men's pain? Do you understand men's pain? Because when they do, instead of going from being angry at men and thinking all men are quote unquote bastards, they start to realize that, oh, these men are just in pain and they have been traumatized in the same way that women have, and they develop more compassion. And through that compassion, they're able to actually develop healthier relationships with men.
Yeah, no, very well said. And yeah, I like the compassion point because I do think that and men generally we're less likely to write someone off, like because he's a misogynistic and they just throw him to their trash. Whereas most of us, well, definitely I have, we have got friends and even us ourselves once upon a time may have exhibited those like misogynistic, whatever these troubling traits. But we obviously we didn't write ourselves off and we don't write our friends off because we know that we maybe still see the good and that there's evolution that can come. Whereas if it's like labeling someone who is, you know, because of certain things that they've said or what they view kind of, you know, like let's eradicate this person from society, you're not actually going to help that person kind of thing. Whereas if you know in your friendship group, if you was once upon a time kind of like that, or you've got friends who are like that, you know that no, there's still some good in that person. Let's work with them to get to from A to B kind of thing. And I just think that's where there's this kind of disconnect where not trying to understand where some people are coming from. With young people, I think it's different because obviously, you know, they're vulnerable, so people are more protective. Whereas if you're speaking about someone over, let's say over the age of 25, it's very difficult to just kind of like, again, unless they're doing something that's illegal, you can't just write them off because they've got some troubling views. You can sit with them, listen to them, maybe challenge them, but not kind of just like be, oh, you're labeled them as like a misogynistic, therefore we don't want to kind of hear your opinion. So they definitely, I do think there kind of needs to be more of that dialogue. But I think men are more comfortable to kind of have that conversation with someone, even if they vehemently disagree with that person, they can still see where he's coming from and then maybe then work to try and how you can change that and realize that even as men, we need different types of masculinity or like healthy masculinity. There's not just going to be the one guy that everyone's going to respect, and we can pick and choose that which we like in us for to kind of develop our own kind of like masculinity that we kind of consider to be healthy, rather than looking at this like, well, Jesus is around or like this Jesus figure, Muhammad. It's not gonna, you're not gonna get that. So, yeah, I just wanted to. Now, my next question, actually, because cover my question, you have kind of answered about the difference between a sex coach and the intimacy coach. But have you got any other projects or courses that you've got that you want to quickly promote before I think about my next question?
I've got a workshop coming up and doing with my
What's it?
partner.
Yeah,
It's called
yeah,
Fired Up. It's all about how to have, you know, deeper, more meaningful conversation around sex inside of your relationship. So if the link is in my bio, I'm trying to think of the date. It's like it's in April. It's in early April. I should know the date, but I can't remember, not on my head. But yeah, the workshop's really about talking about how couples can talk about sex in a way that they can have sex with exploration without
yeah.
getting like bogged down in fear and worry and judgment and arguments, and have it in a nice, healthy, connected way.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's good. And where can people find more about that? Is that on your website? Is it where can people find out about more about that
It's in
workshop?
the link in my bio.
Okay, so anyone's interested, go and I've pinned David's IG handle, so the authentic man underscore, the authentic man underscore, and you can check out his website, theauthenticman.net. Want to circle back to, you kind of touched on this in the beginning of our conversation when you were speaking about some of like the myths around like men being always readily and available for intimacy. What are some of the other, and you touched on premature ejaculation and ED, from the work that you do also with men, what are some of like the biggest myths or misconceptions that people have about men and sex?
Mhm. I think obviously even like men being confident sexually, that's something that I'm seeing a lot of men being really lacking confidence sexually to be with their partners, even to approach their partners, to know how to touch their partners. Which I also see something interesting pop up a few times. It's not been super common, but a couple of times where um, for some reasons, women are unable to really communicate what they like and don't like with their partners, and that creates a lot of trouble in a relationship because, especially intimately, because then the man doesn't have any confidence, she doesn't have any confidence, and it can create issues there. Um, I think one of the misconceptions was around leadership, like that a man knows how to lead, and he knows how to lead, whether that's sexually, whether that's a relationship. And when I say lead, I don't mean kind of, and I was saying this for yourself, more for the viewers. It's like when I say lead, I don't mean force. I mean lead is in I have, we have a shared vision of where we want our relationship to go, or where we want our intimacy to go, and putting in plans and structures and activities to start moving the relationship in that direction. And that could be tiny little things like, planning date nights and, but it can also be big things like, putting together 10-year plans and stuff like that. A lot of men really don't know how to lead a relationship. They just kind of think the goal is to get into it. And then once they're in it, they're just, it's done. After work is complete. They don't realize that it's like a garden, it needs tending, it needs watering, it needs pruning. You need to put some new plants down sometimes. You need to take some of the plants out. It's like something that needs tending continuously. I can't really think of anything else. Misconceptions. Talks about ED. You talked about.
To be honest, you've said a couple. There was one that I wanted to hear about, which I think I heard in one of your clips that you posted on, whether it's on your page or um, what was it called? Is it the Man Up podcast, the Man Up talks? Can you talk a little bit about that, and then I want to ask a question in relation to one of the videos I saw. But can you talk a little bit about? I'm not sure if it's still ongoing. Is it the Man Up talks that you founded?
Yeah,
Can you
yeah.
talk a little bit?
Yeah, so it's three of us, my friend Kapil and one of my other friends, AJ, and we founded Man Up Talks. Really, it was like a place to have kind of inspirational talks for men. We started it just before, maybe 6 months before the pandemic. We did a couple. We had a really nice crowd actually the second time round, and then we had a third booked, and then the pandemic hit, and then we were like, oh, we'll wait, like a lot of people, and then we've just all gone off and done different projects. But the idea behind it was really to bring men together and women into the same space to talk about men stuff. So for everyone to hear about some of the issues, or we spoke very candidly about our own personal issues when it came to being a man, a man, and our experience of being a man. And yeah, actually, sometimes I actually still speak to the two guys. We regularly catch up, but like it was a really beautiful space we created where women, some women turned up, and I never forget some of the uh, testimonies we got. We're like women, people saying, "I've never heard men speak like this. I never knew that men felt like this about things." Um, so yeah, like even reminded me, I'm like, yeah, it'd be nice to get that going again at some point.
Because one of the clips which I reposted, this was months ago, but when you was talking about, um, I don't know whether it is actually premature ejaculation, but like finishing early or finishing quickly than you'd like, right?
Mhm.
And now it happens to the best of us.
Mhm.
Now, even amongst men, we have this bravado that it doesn't happen,
Mm.
and that's part of like the misinformation or miseducation that men have, like in the sense of if they kind of finish too quickly, they have a problem, or their partner might think they have a problem, but then is it really a problem in and of itself, kind of thing, what he's kind of speaking about, that and
Mm.
this expectation that we have as men, and even not being able to speak about it even sometimes with the partner, and you might have to get into certain things to kind of pretend that it didn't happen, so I really enjoyed that. But those type of like conversations, why do you think that men generally don't really like are comfortable kind of having a conversation about like sex and intimacy, especially in the public setting?
Mm. Judgment, big one. Men are fear. The fear of judgment for men is so. I think it's one of the most common fears that come up inside of my coaching across the board, across whatever we're coaching. It's like the fear of what other people are going to think, particularly men. Men worry about what other men are going to think of them. Um, the sex is such a vulnerable thing because we literally are naked. It's like there's no way to put on any masks. There's no way to like. And when you're talking about it, you're really putting yourself on the line. And I think it's that vulnerability that men really find uncomfortable of like talking about sex openly in front of people. It's like the fear of them being seen as lesser than, not knowing what they're doing, all that kind of the shame as well around sex. So many of us are brought up in households where, you know, our parents aren't talking about sex. If a sex scene comes on the TV, then that TV magically changed channel and we're watching Gardener's World or something. So there's this like embedded shame that so many men have about sex that it's a heavy topic for them. And then, men don't have spaces. There are not many spaces that men can see where they can go and talk about sex and feel kind of safe to open up. And then you look at the kind of opposite side where women have had so many spaces open up around sexual empowerment in the last, it's been the last 40 years, but, in my lifetime, I see, you go into a sex shop, right? And I always say this, you go into a sex shop, right? And you have to think about this, like men are not so particular with with how they have sex and who they have sex with, right? If you go into a sex shop, how much stuff is there that's there for men? Hardly anything. It's all you're going to see 99% of the stuff in there is for women, really. There's going to be a little cubby hole on the side for men to, toys for them. And okay, it's expanding now, but for me that shows the examples like men that have so far to come in the realm of sex and to expressing and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's just this fear. There's so much fear around the area of sex and talking about it, whether that's inside the relationship or in public sectors. So, and a lot of guys, they feel scared to even listen to a podcast about it. It's like they feel like they're afraid that they're going to realize that they're not very good or they've been doing something wrong. So they would rather not listen to it at all than realize that. So they stay away from it.
Yeah, I mean, I always get, and I'm sure it will happen today. Like a lot of like even this type of discussion, guys might jump in and jump out. They'll wait for it to be saved, and then they'll listen to it. I get messages. That's why I save because so it's like I know it's a number of men because like again like the shame and the fear of being judged. They don't want to be seen as seeking this information because people think that they're less than, but they still want that information. So then how can they receive that information when no one knows kind of thing? So it's like, and that's why I think social media is great because apart from maybe IG lives because people can see if you've joined, but but because you can see watch after you can take the content or you can listen to podcasts or you can go to like people like yourself because obviously it's going to be confidential. But I know that a number of men obviously they wouldn't, and that can be obviously quite difficult with the work that you're doing because I imagine a number of men wouldn't sing and dance about the great service or the advice that that they've received. So it's one of those like a lot of businesses is spread by word of mouth, but for men it's like generally they're not going to confide in. I mean, I'm going to inform even their friends who may be going through what they went through, kind of thing. Do you understand what I mean? It's just, and that's probably also one of the challenges. But well, hopefully things may change. But it's just a reality. It's not like working with women. And again, you have to definitely be more patient and realize, okay, the market that you're in, and just kind of be more consistent. But just a couple of final questions before we wrap up. Just wondering, like the type of men that come to you, like clients, how do they like? Is it by referrals, like maybe their partner or ex has kind of told them to go and seek your work, or how have they? I don't know if this is a question that you've asked, but how do they commonly kind of come across your work and seek your services?
Mm. So I'd say most people it's usually podcast and
Okay.
Instagram, podcast and Instagram. And I see this interesting thing with Instagram with people is like a guy would have followed me. He'll tell me that I'll follow you for like 6 months and I've been reading all your posts. He hadn't liked a single post in that time.
Yeah, yeah. Of course. Yeah, of course.
He's, you know,
Yeah. I'm
he'll
surprised he even followed you. Probably just be watching. Just be watching. I see in the stories, the same guys watching every pod. I ain't gonna like anything. I'm not gonna comment on anything, but I'm watching. Yeah, I'm taking the content. That's very common. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And they usually get in contact. And
Yeah.
I've had a few referrals actually. That's something that's has increased recently. Um, I have to thank some of my female listeners and viewers because I've had a number of people, number of men come to me and said, "Ah, my my girlfriend recommended you, my sister." Um, there's a girl I used to, one guy was like, a girl I used to date put me in touch with you, like showed me your Instagram, or like just friends of friends. So that's something that has increased, especially through women. But mainly through podcasts, through Instagram, that people kind of come across me and get in touch.
Oh, cool. And do those men or like men in general, do they like when they like new clients, do they know like what problem they have, or is it okay? They work with you to kind of identify the problem and then the solution. So yeah, my question again is twofold. Is it that they come into you, I've got a problem and this is what I want, like this is the goal. Can you help me get there? Or is it a case of I've got this problem, I don't know what to do about it, and then you take them through the process to kind of or help them find like whatever resolution that they need.
Mm. Yeah, most men are they have a problem that they've identified as a problem, they see as the problem, um, and they often have a end result they want. Like, you know, someone comes and they're struggling with dating, you know, their anxiety is stopping them from being able to date confidently. They'll say that, you know, what they want is to be able to, you know, create a loving, connected relationship. Or quite commonly, men will come to me and say, oh, I'm really struggling for confidence in, you know, dating or expression or relationship or intimacy. And they'll say that what they want is, you know, happy, connected relationships. But I also do get some men who come and they're like, I have this problem. This is what they think the problem is. And then after a couple of conversations, or one conversation actually, we see that the problem is something isn't what they thought it was. It's a bit deeper, it's a bit larger, and it's spanning more across maybe areas of their life. Um, and then through an investigation of that problem, they start to think, they realize that the thing they thought they wanted isn't actually the thing they want, which, you know, is quite common. So then we have more of an exploration. I kind of like to work in a way that's like, okay, what's there for you? Like I don't create like this plan of like these are the 7 steps we're going to do.
Yeah.
Like we might start down the first 2 steps and realize that, oh, actually, God, there's this other bigger thing we want to look at, or, you know, today
Mm.
something's coming up in your life that you want to talk about. So often there's a superficial problem that we think we have, you know, as a saying I say to my partner and also to other guys I know, the problem you think you have isn't really the problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. So it's kind of like reframing the way they kind of view things as, yeah, no, that no, very well said. I agree with that. Okay, bro. Really appreciate you coming on here. Is there anything else that you want to plug or talk about before we wrap up? Again, of course, I'll save this. I think, yeah, I'll definitely save this because obviously I think it's really beneficial. And again, the guys that have kind of jumped in and jumped out, they can kind of now they can kind of listen to it. They're waiting for it to end because I thought it was going to be an hour. We've gone just over an hour. But yeah, is there anything that you want to sign off by promoting or talking about? I know you spoke about your upcoming workshop that you're doing. I think it's in April. You've got your one-to-one sessions that you do, which people can find out from your website, authenticman.net. Again, you've got your Instagram. I'll put your IG handle, authenticman underscore. And obviously, you've got your podcast, the Authentic Man podcast, with over 190 episodes that people can find out on Spotify, Apple, and yeah, obviously on YouTube as well. You've done a number of interviews as well that people can check out. But is there anything else that you want to kind of plug or promote before we wrap up?
I'd say the only thing I would probably plug actually is the couples coaching I do. You know,
Oh
working
yeah,
with couples, like helping them. You know, it's not therapy, it's not counseling because we're coaches, so we're really focused on helping you move forward and create new solutions. But it's something that we've been doing over the last year and we've seen some really good results, like helping couples stay together or deepen their connection in particular. So often that's, you know, working with one person in a relationship can help. When you work with 2 of them, like it really helps bring the relationship forward.
yeah, good, 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 great. Thank you very much, bro. Loved everything you said apart from the Saka comment, but again, we're gonna have to see if we can do something about that. But yeah, honestly, it's been a pleasure, and yeah, keep up the good work, and yeah, thanks to everyone who's joined in and listening. And yeah, this is David Chambers, the authentic man. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing, bro. It's much appreciated. I'll speak to you
Thank
soon.
you. Thank you,
Take care,
guys.
bro.
Talk to you later.
Bye.